The most useful modern explanation for the Dyatlov Pass tragedy does not begin with a giant avalanche sweeping a camp off the mountain. It begins with something smaller, a slab of compacted snow moving just far enough to strike a tent, injure people inside, and make 9 experienced hikers believe that staying there was more dangerous than walking into the darkness. That distinction matters because the evidence does not prove every step of what happened on the night of February 1, 1959, but it may explain the decision that made every later step fatal. This is not a story about monsters, aliens, or a secret weapon. It is a test of a physical explanation, what the snow-slab model can account for, what later fieldwork observed, and where the case remains open. 10 people began the expedition from Sverdlovsk. They were not unprepared tourists. The group included experienced winter hikers from the Urals Polytechnic Institute and a veteran sports instructor. Yoori became ill and turned back before the final stage. The other 9 continued toward Mount Tor-10. That ordinary medical decision made Yudin the only member of the expedition to survive. On February 1, the group established its tent on the eastern slope of Cholat. Retellings often emphasize that the name can be translated as Dead Mountain, as if the landscape had issued a warning. A name is atmosphere, not evidence. The important details are physical. The hikers were above the forest, exposed to severe cold and strong wind, and they cut into the snow to create a level platform for the tent. At some point during the night, something changed. The tent was cut from inside. Boots, warm clothing, food, and equipment remained behind. Tracks led downhill toward the forest. The group left the shelter without the protection that experienced winter travelers would normally consider essential. Weeks later, searchers found the tent. Bodies were eventually recovered near the forest, on the route back toward the slope, and in a ravine. Most died from hypothermia. Several also had severe chest or skull injuries. Those facts support an emergency. They do not identify the emergency. The Soviet investigation closed in 1959 with a phrase that preserved the uncertainty, a compelling natural force. Over the following decades, the gap was filled by theories involving an attack, military testing, strange lights, infrasound, and creatures that belong more naturally to entertainment than evidence. The stranger details of the recovery made those stories easy to sell. But none of the selected records establishes an attacker, a weapon, an alien event, or a monster as the cause. An avalanche was always among the more ordinary explanations. It also appeared to conflict with the scene. The average slope above the tent seemed too shallow. Searchers reported no obvious avalanche debris when they arrived weeks later. The hikers had established camp hours before the emergency, so there was no clear immediate trigger. And some of the traumatic injuries seemed unusual for people caught in moving snow. If the word avalanche means a huge, fast-moving mass that buries everything in its path, the tent scene does not look convincing. In July 2020, an inquiry by the Russian Prosecutor General's office announced that an avalanche had triggered the disaster. That was an official conclusion, but it did not by itself answer the physical objections. A conclusion becomes stronger when it explains how a supposedly shallow slope can release, why the failure is delayed, why the tent is not carried away, and how serious injuries can occur without a massive slide. In 2021, researchers Johan Gomes and Alexander Puzrin published a peer-reviewed model designed around those problems. Their proposal was not a mountain-wide avalanche. It was a small slab directly above the tent. The model depends on 4 conditions. First, the slope was not a smooth, uniform plane. Its average angle could look modest, while smaller terrain steps were locally much steeper. Second, a weaker layer of snow may have been buried beneath a harder slab. Third, the hikers cut into the slope to level the tent, removing support from below part of that slab. Fourth, strong wind continued carrying and depositing snow above the camp. Together, those conditions create a delayed failure. The cut does not have to release the slab immediately. Wind can keep adding weight until the weak layer finally breaks. In the model, Realistic loading could produce a release roughly 7.5 to 13.5 hours after the slope was cut. That range is important because it turns the long delay from an objection into part of the mechanism. The size matters too. A smaller slab could strike the upper part of the tent without erasing the camp or leaving the kind of debris field people expect from a major avalanche. The researchers' simulations suggested that a compact block of snow could cause severe but non-fatal chest or skull injuries consistent with part of the medical record. The snow does not need to kill everyone at the tent. It only needs to damage the shelter, injure members of the group, and create a credible fear that more snow could follow. That may explain the cut in the canvas. Imagine the decision from inside, not from a photograph taken weeks later. It is dark. Wind is moving snow across the slope. The normal entrance may be obstructed or too slow to reach. Someone may be injured. The tent may no longer feel structurally safe. Cutting through the fabric gives the group the fastest exit. Moving downhill would take them away from the loaded slope and toward the nearest forest, where there is at least some protection and material for a fire. This is a reconstruction, not a recording. The surviving evidence does not tell us exactly what each person saw, who was injured first, or what the group believed. The model can make an emergency exit rational. It cannot prove every decision after they left. Searchers found the remains of a small fire near the forest. Some bodies lay on an apparent route back toward the tent. 4 were later recovered from the ravine. The record does not preserve one agreed sequence connecting those locations. Darkness, wind, injury, separation, and temperatures below -25 degrees created a situation in which a temporary retreat could become irreversible. The avalanche model also had to answer a larger objection. Does this area actually produce avalanches? Follow-up expeditions reported in 2022 used a high-resolution terrain model to examine the slope. The work showed that the broad average angle hides local steps exceeding 28, and in places, 30 degrees. Researchers also documented small slab avalanches on nearby eastern slopes. Under severe wind, traces of one recent slide reportedly became difficult to see within a short time as transported snow covered the surface again. That evidence weakens 2 popular objections. The terrain is not uniformly flat, and small slab avalanches are not unknown in the area. It does not prove that one struck the tent in 1959. The modern avalanches occurred nearby, not at the exact historical moment, and the authors noted that several snow and trigger conditions were different. Their conclusion remained careful. The avalanche danger that night was real, and the mechanism was plausible. The case itself remained open. What about the details that dominate sensational retellings? 2 bodies were reported with missing eyes, and 1 with a missing tongue. Traces of radioactivity were reported on some clothing. Those facts sound dramatic when removed from time and place. The final bodies were recovered from a ravine months after the event, and the selected evidence does not connect missing soft tissue or radioactive traces to the moment the tent was abandoned. They are not, by themselves, proof of murder, weapons testing, or a supernatural cause. The same rule applies to every theory in this case. A strange fact is not useful unless it forms a chain from cause to action to result. The snow-slab explanation forms part of that chain. Wind loads an irregular slope. A weakened slab releases above a tent that has been cut into the snow. The impact creates injury and fear of a second release. The group exits quickly and moves downhill. Exposure, confusion, and trauma then turn an emergency evacuation into a fatal night. But part is not all. The model does not identify the exact slab, reproduce the hiker's thoughts, or prove the later movement of every person. It does not make every injury and body location inevitable. What it does is replace an impossible-looking avalanche with a smaller, delayed mechanism that fits more of the physical evidence than the cinematic version people usually imagine. So was Dyatlov Pass solved by an avalanche? The responsible answer is narrower. A small snow slab is a physically tested and increasingly supported explanation for why the hikers may have abandoned the tent. It can also account for some of the traumatic injuries. Later fieldwork confirms that the terrain can release avalanches under severe winter conditions. None of that proves the complete sequence beyond doubt. The modern evidence does not erase the mystery. It moves its boundary. The hardest question may no longer be whether a snow failure was possible. It is what happened after 9 experienced people made a desperate decision that, for a few minutes, may have seemed like the safest choice available.